In this video, I'm going to share with you 5 things I did when I was trying to learn how to write that failed. And I'm going to make a prediction that you have tried most of these 5 things. In fact, you're probably doing some of them right now. And then at the end of this video, I'm going to share with you the 3 things I tried that actually worked. My name is Tim Grahl. I'm the CEO of StoryGrid, and I'm the author of 7 books. My most recent is The Shithead, which just came out a few weeks ago, and it's already received hundreds of reviews and multiple blurbs from New York Times best-selling authors. My partner, Sean Coyne, is the creator and founder of StoryGrid, and he's a writer, editor, and story researcher with over 30 years of experience. And everything I teach in this video and that we teach at StoryGrid is based on his extensive experience. So let's jump into those 5 things I tried when I was learning how to write that did not work. So the first one starts with this quote from Stephen King you've probably seen 1,000 times. If you want to be a writer, you must do 2 things above all others: read a lot and write a lot. We are told over and over to just get the words down. Get up in the morning, write your 500 words, your 1,000, your 2,000 words a day, and just get your story down. Maybe you've participated in NaNoWriMo and tried to write a 50,000 word novel during the month of November. I won NaNoWriMo 3 times. So this is what I did. I got up every morning and I got my words down. I just wrote my book and got my story down week after week, month after month. And guess what? It didn't work. Yes, I had lots of words written, but I never wrote an actual working story. In fact, it just made it worse because just putting the words down, I kept making the same mistakes over and over and ingrained them as bad habits. If just getting the words down was all it took to write great fiction, you and I would probably already be pros. So that's the first thing that didn't work, is reading and writing a lot did not work. Let's look at the second thing that didn't work. I kept thinking the problem was my understanding of overall storytelling elements, of not understanding how to construct a great story. And so I started reading all of the books out there about how to construct a great story. I read Joseph Campbell's A Hero with 1,000 Faces, Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, The Anatomy of Story by John Truby, Story by Robert McKee, and many others. I watched YouTube videos, I talked to fellow writers, I did everything I possibly could to learn better story structure, but what I didn't realize until much later was it wasn't my story structure at all. In fact, my writing didn't work from the first sentence in the first scene. And so no matter how perfectly constructed I had my story in my head, the reader was never going to get to that amazing third act of my story because the whole thing didn't work. And so the second thing that didn't work was learning more theory and tips did not work. The third thing I tried was consuming training from professional writers. I watched the YouTube video series from Brandon Sanderson on YouTube. I signed up for masterclass.com and watched all of the trainings from all of these amazing writers. I went through YouTube and watched all of the videos and interviews I could with professional writers, and none of this made a real impact. Yes, I picked up some tips here and there, but the truth is, and this took me a really long time to understand, is that being able to do something and being able to teach it are 2 completely different things. And most writers do so much of the process intuitively that when they try to tell somebody else how to do it, they can't ever get it out because they don't actually know how they do it. They have their way of thinking about it and their structure and their way of getting the words down, but ultimately they don't exactly know how they do it because they learned it very intuitively. So when they go to teach it, they are trying to be helpful. They're trying to teach everything they know, but it doesn't ultimately get you where you want to be, which is learning how to be a great writer. And so the third thing that I tried that didn't work was learning from professional writers. Let's look at the fourth thing. I had heard about these writing groups. So there was the famed one, the Inklings group that had C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien in it. There's the more modern one, the Dangerous Writers group that included Cheryl Strayed and Chuck Palahniuk. And I thought, okay, if I could just join a writers group and start getting other writers to look at my writing and give me feedback, then this would be a huge help. This is what would get me to finally be a great writer. Instead, I ran into nothing but problems. I joined several different groups and they all ended with problems. So first of all, so many people that joined these groups, they would not turn in their own writing, but they would show up into the group and to give you their advice on your writing. So they were much more interested in critiquing your writing, but they weren't interested in having their own writing critiqued. And then when you did get feedback on your writing, it was so vague and subjective that it wasn't anything you could actually work on, something I could actually fix in my writing. And it was stuff like, well, it was a little soft in the middle, or I didn't like that character, or it was a little long for me, or, well, I don't like to read this kind of writing. And so when I took this advice and tried to actually apply it to my writing, I couldn't really do anything. There was nothing I could actually do. And so before long in these groups, people would stop showing up and they would kind of fizzle out, or I would just stop coming because I was so frustrated. And this was the fourth thing I did that didn't work. Joining writing groups did not work. All right, now we're on the fifth thing. And so many times we're told as writers, the advice given to us is, hey, you've got your story idea, just sit down and start writing. And maybe if you're a plotter, you plan some things out. But the general idea is just sit down and write your novel. You've got a story to tell. Your story matters. Let's get it down on paper. And so you open up a new Scrivener document, or you open up Google Docs and you just start typing and getting your story down. I tried this so many times, and I have dozens of unworking books that are in Scrivener files to show for it. But the problem is, telling somebody to just sit down and write their book is like telling somebody that's learning how to play the guitar for the first time to, hey, just sit down and play Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin. You've got a song to say, just play it, put it down. It should be pretty simple. It's like somehow we believe because we know how to type words that we can tell a great, compelling story. But yet, if you can't write great scenes, you can't write great sentences, when you sit down to write an entire novel, it's like planning to set out on a cross-country road trip, and yet you can't actually drive a car, so you end up putting it in the ditch before you even get out of the neighborhood. That's basically what my writing was every time I sat down to just write my book. And so this is the fifth thing I tried that didn't work. Writing novels didn't work. So those are the 5 things that did not work for me. The first was reading and writing a lot didn't work. The second was learning more theories and tips didn't work. The third of learning from professional writers didn't work. The fourth of joining writers groups didn't work. And the fifth of just sitting down and writing my novel didn't work. And so I want you to stop right now, go down in the comments and tell me how many of those that you have tried that didn't work as well. So put that down in the comments right now. So if all of those ultimately failed for me, what actually worked for me? What allowed me to finally write a book that I'm proud of, that I put out into the world, that's garnering great reviews, getting reviews from top writers? Why was I finally able to do that after years and years of failing? So there's 3 things that we figured out at StoryGrid that can help writers level up quickly, and it's what worked for me as well. So let's look at the first one. In almost every other creative endeavor, we separate the idea of practicing something from performing something. So let's go back to that example of playing the guitar. If you're practicing the guitar, you usually sit alone in your room and practice, or maybe you have a teacher, somebody that's teaching you how to play the guitar. But you practice the guitar, and then once you're good at the skill of playing the guitar, you'll go out on stage and actually play the guitar in front of a crowd. The practice of it is different from the performance of it. It's the same for dancing or woodworking or anything else, where you will practice something over and over, and then once you're comfortable that you can do it well, you'll set out and actually perform something, try to create something great. But in writing, for some reason, we just smush these things together. We're trying to learn how to write while also trying to write a novel or write something publishable. And this causes all kinds of problems. First of all, it just puts too much pressure on the writing. When you're practicing something, you don't really care about the outcome. It's all about skill development. It's about getting better at something. But if you're trying to write something that you want to publish, it's putting this pressure on it that is not ready for your writing when you're at a low skill point. It also just cuts off your ability to learn quickly. Because you're emotionally connected to the writing, you care about these characters, you care about this story, you want this to go out into the world, then you don't take risks. You don't try new things. You try to keep it something that you think it will actually work and be publishable. And yet, if you were just practicing, then you would just throw things at the wall and try different things because it didn't matter the outcome. You were just trying to build up your skills. And this is what we've learned at StoryGrid, is that you have to separate the practice from the performance of something. So at StoryGrid and for my own writing, I just started practicing my scene writing. Just practicing. I wasn't thinking about publishing anything. I was just trying to learn the skill of writing and kept that separate. And then when I felt like I developed my skills to the point that I was ready, that I was good, then I sat down and tried to write my book that became The Shithead. So the first principle that made the huge difference for me was separating practice from performance. All right, let's look at the second thing. Now, I've already talked about how writing and reading a lot doesn't work, but why doesn't it work? It feels like intuitively it should work, but why doesn't it work? And for this, we're going to go to James Clear. He's the mega best-selling author of the book Atomic Habits, and this is what he has to say about practice. While regular practice might include mindless repetitions, deliberate practice requires focused attention and is conducted with the specific goal of improving performance. In the beginning, showing up and putting in your reps is the most important thing, but after a while, we begin to carelessly overlook small errors and miss daily opportunities for improvement. Mindless activity is the enemy of deliberate practice, and this is what I think of when you're just sitting down trying to get your words down. So mindless activity is the enemy of deliberate practice. Too often, we assume we are getting better simply because we are gaining experience. In reality, we are merely reinforcing our current habits, not improving them. This is what I did for far too long as a writer, was just getting my words down, trying to tell my story, and then making the same mistakes over and over. Telling myself that eventually this would turn into something, or I would kind of pick up on it eventually, and yet I never did. And so what we're talking about here is not practicing, but deliberate practice. And deliberate practice is made up of three things. First of all, we're going to take the overarching skill and we're going to break it down into individual skills. So again, just like playing the guitar isn't really one skill. It's a lot of individual skills. It's playing chords, it's learning how to play notes, it's learning how to strum the guitar, it's learning how to tune the guitar. It's all of these little skills. Writing is the same way. There's all of these little skills of writing exposition and character development and dialogue and all of these things that go into writing. So we need to take writing and break it down into individual skills. So that's step one of deliberate practice. Step two of deliberate practice is practicing those individual skills. So again, instead of sitting down and writing an entire novel, we're going to narrow this down into just focus on writing a scene and then look at even the individual parts that go into writing a scene and focus on practicing those. So I might write a scene that has almost all dialogue in it, so I can practice writing dialogue. Or I could write a scene that's almost all action, so I can practice writing action. I can practice how to write great exposition. I can practice all of these individual skills at that scene level. And then the third part of deliberate practice, this is really important. And so again, I'm just going to go back to James Clear and what he has to say on this subject. James says that perhaps the greatest difference between deliberate practice and simple repetition is this: feedback. The first effective feedback system is measurement, but the second effective feedback system is coaching. One consistent finding across disciplines is that coaches are often essential for sustaining deliberate practice. In many cases, it is nearly impossible to both perform a task and measure your progress at the same time. So that third step of deliberate practice is getting expert feedback. So we take it, we break it down into individual skills, then we start practicing those individual skills, and then we get feedback on the practice of those individual skills. And so this is the second thing that made all the difference for me, was getting expert feedback. So I would practice individual skills of writing, and then I would get feedback on that writing as well. And then they would tell me what I did right, what I did wrong, and what I need to work on next. And I would go back and do that again. And this is when I started seeing my writing get so much better, because I was getting expert feedback on it. And this leads me to the third thing we did that made a huge difference in my writing. And so think about how long a novel is, right? Just how long does it take you to write a novel? Is it 6 months, a year? I mean, you hear everything from a month to 10 years or something like that. But for most of it, it's probably at least 6 months to write a novel. Then think about everything that all the moving pieces that goes into writing that novel, a really great novel that works. There's so many moving pieces to it. I don't know, dozens, probably 100 different things, right? So now think about all the things that can go wrong in all of those things you're trying to do. And then also think about that length of time. So if you sit down and write an entire novel and then give it to an editor, your feedback is after months and months of time has passed and so many things have gone wrong, it's almost hard to give you feedback. And so this is why we have to shorten it down. And what we found at StoryGrid and what we did for my writing was focus on scene writing. How do I write great scenes? Because what this does is it shrinks down the number of things that can go wrong. And most importantly, it shrinks down the amount of time, right? So instead of getting feedback after months and months of working on a novel, I can write a scene in a few days and then get feedback. So that's the third piece that worked, is to shorten the feedback loop. Most writers have an extremely long feedback loop, months or years that they're writing on their own and not getting any feedback. And what we found is if you can shorten that feedback loop to a couple of days, it makes all the difference. And so these are the three things that moved me out of this space of doing all of these things that didn't work and actually helped me level up as a writer so much faster. And again, those are separating practice and performance. That's number one. Number two is getting expert feedback on your writing. And number three is to shorten the feedback loop to a few days instead of months or years. If you do those three things, it's going to help you level up your writing so much faster, and it's going to help you actually get to those dreams you have of writing something great. Now, I've got something for you if you want to take a next step on this. There's two things. First of all, we have scene writing workshops that we run at StoryGrid that incorporate all of this into it. Again, we found this working on me and working on other writers, and now we put it into a package that any writer can jump in and take advantage of. So if you go to storygrid.com/workshop, you can see our next workshop that we're running. You can put in an application and see how to join us for that. The second thing I have for you is our 13-point scene writing checklist. So when we talk about giving feedback on a scene, this is what we use to give feedback on a scene at StoryGrid. So if you want to see that rubric and how to apply it to your own writing, you can go to storygrid.com/checklist and download that now. Both of those links are down in the description. Now, if you want to see more behind the scenes on how I wrote my book, The Shithead, I put all of that in a video here on YouTube, so you can click on your screen here in just a second and watch that next. But either way, thanks so much for being a writer. Thanks for being a part of our community here at StoryGrid, and I'll see you next time.